Okay, folks. I haven't really recorded anything recently. I'm just kind of, holding on to my phone while I drive. Kind of keeping it at an angle. Keep my eye on the road. That sort of deal. My drive's usually about like 45 minutes to an hour. So, not sure how long this video will be, but I'm not really following up on the last video per se. Still on Nofap, still going with that. It's kind of just become sort of second nature, at present. I mean, I'm past the 6 months mark, and looking forward to actually setting new records, so to speak. But the irony is, like, as time goes on, my focus moves on to other things. While I'm handling this or holding down, this whole sort of practice, and I've been obviously having to deal with the continuing fallout of those revelations concerning my family, and it's been tough because there are days when it's kind of like I'm quote unquote seeing red. I just get really angry thinking about what was done. Days when I'm kind of despondent or in sort of malaise because thinking about the effects of it all, and just looking at this one life, and sort of just kind of seeing like how much it's been sort of affected by the actions of that scumbag, and how much power and control he's had over the lives of like myself and my family, and thinking about how he got to move on, get married, and have kids, and all that kind of stuff, and sort of seeing sort of the timeline of my life and the lives of my family members, and wondering what if that never happened, what would life be like? The sort of idea of a stolen life or stolen lives kind of floats around in my mind. But oddly enough, the thing that's giving me sort of anxiety right now is not really that. It's stuff in my work, and it's not at all like the last workplace, because the work itself is, generally speaking, pretty good. I like it. I mean, I went back to there. I've been there for a little over 6 months. Had my one-on-one with my supervisor today. Things are cool. There were no issues that he had to like bring up or discuss with me, saying that I need to change this way or that way, or that people were reporting on me or something like that. It's nothing of that nature. Which is good. But the thing is, I have this coworker who he's got a background in mechanical engineering, and he loves to talk about all sorts of stuff, talking about philosophy and politics and religion and etc. Various topics, and it's kind of like there are things that interest me, and I sort of, it was kind of stuff like I would try and like steer clear of it. Maybe skirt the edge of it. I feel like I kind of dipped my toes in those subjects, talking with him and others, in sort of this group at work, and I just kind of started getting sort of the perspective of like, I mean, and I guess I shouldn't be surprised, given where I live, his perspective on a lot of things, and I just kind of tried to bow out of any further discussion because, I mean, I think it should kind of be obvious, like, why. But where I live is very much like a kind of a monocultural bubble, and I don't necessarily agree with everything here. I have a lot of issues with a lot of the views of people in this area. Not like I hate them, vehemently or anything, or have serious like conflicts. I have in the past. I've had things happen to me. If anybody who's like followed my channel for the last several years, they know I've had experiences which have, anyways, shaped my views on a whole slew of different subjects. And, well, they talk about, I could use that sort of a discussion point, or maybe like, not maybe a discussion point, I don't know what the term I'm looking for, but like an example. I guess so that's the simplest way of putting it, an example. Where it's sort of like my experiences in life have sort of led me to certain conclusions and a perspective on things. Like even if one were to talk about politics, for instance, I think it was like because one of my friends, for instance, back, he's from, my, I guess what, basically served as like sort of what I would call my hometown in this state. He's from there, and he had like posted a video link on Facebook, basically to this like video by this one YouTuber. I know at least one person on my channel, follows me, relatively consistently and knows who I'm referring to. But watching that combined with my experiences in college, which basically, like, you could say kind of put a lot of my old ideals to the test, whether it came to stuff related to relationships, intergender dynamics, culture, politics, religion, etc., etc. Essentially, that sort of mixture of things, you could say, there's different series of influences and events and whatnot and personalities. Led me down this path of basically changing a lot of my views on different issues. I definitely talked a lot about the red pill back then. Haven't really gotten to it too much now. I think in some ways my understandings have kind of become internalized or like second nature. Kind of people talk about like looking at things through a red pill lens, that sort of deal. But essentially, it's kind of like my perception is a lot of my views. Some of them are rooted in factual, how should I put it, like empirical evidence. You look at the data, that sort of thing. Look at the data and make your conclusions based off the data. That sort of, approach. Others of that are rooted in very intense experiences that, when I say intense, I mean like in terms of their emotional impact on me, that, and I'm aware of the fact that sometimes that we all react or respond to things, or my perspective on such as like I'm having an emotional reaction. It's not necessarily as the empirical scientific truth, but it's such that it's kind of like I'm taking the safer route of not risking certain things because I've been burned before, that sort of a deal. But I kind of have gotten the perspective that like it's just something that like I've dipped my toes in it. I kind of got the vibe that him and I didn't agree on a lot of things, and I've had the experience, and this is kind of, and I did kind of state to him that, hey, it's work, it's probably not the best place to be talking about this. I really want to kind of bow out of this. It's like you go to work, you're on a team, you gotta try and find commonalities to unite around. And I'm sure you guys probably can't see me. I'm lighting wise, but anyways, I made that point that when you're at work, you're trying to find commonalities to unite as a team or some shared goal, to get work done, make money, that sort of thing. And it's probably not best to really sort of go further discussing these sorts of things because of the fact that, and I didn't say ego investments, I didn't use that term, but I basically said that people react very strongly to certain subjects. Like for instance, you could be talking about sexuality, and because it's such a, I think is the word intrinsic? Is that, I'm trying to think if that's not remember, but to think if that's the right word to use. But it's so intrinsic to so many people's experience of life that if you say I believe that a certain let's just say, sexual lifestyle, you don't agree with it or you think it's wrong, whether it's one thing or another, or you get into talking about like, you know, family formation, having kids, or it's political opinions on different things, or whether or not, you know, like you're in favor of some form of censorship, or you're against it, or you're, you know, whatever it is, like, because of people's experiences, you know, it's kind of like like certain words, you use them and they're, you know, around the wrong person because they may have had an experience of being demeaned with that word. They hear that word and it's like it'll cause a strong emotional reaction, you know. And if your opinion is that, well, I don't see what the big deal is, well, you know, you're automatically like putting yourself in a really dangerous position, especially when it comes to staying gainfully employed, you know. And I said, you know, as such, you know, I was detecting disagreements and, you know, perspectival friction, I guess. I didn't use that term, but I, you know, kind of using it now. But basically detected that kind of stuff, and, you know, I also stated, and I've had the experience, and, you know, maybe I shouldn't have said this, I don't know, you tell me, but that I've had the experience of people like, you know, like talking with folks who they seem like really interested in like knowing, getting to know you. They're like, they'll use those terms, like he had used this term in some other conversation, and this is nothing like relational or of a romantic nature. I mean, I'm attracted to women and he's married to a woman, and there's nothing like that going on that would, you know, cause any of that sort of, you know, weirdness. But just the whole like, oh, I want to like, you know, build this friendship, or I want to get to know you or something. Like, I've had the experience of like this one dude in college, for instance. I didn't go into detail with him, but, you know, I'm sure anybody who's followed my videos from years ago, they probably know who I'm referring to. But this one guy who, like, you know, he got into the whole religion thing of like, oh, we're brothers in faith, and, you know, we should, you know, stick together and, you know, work together, and that, you know, we're both part of the leadership of, you know, this major club, you know, chemical engineering club, and, you know, that sort of deal. And it was kind of like that guy figured out enough things about me that he could use against me, because he was also trying to compete with me for that one IDIS girl, and he just caused me a whole bunch of grief, and, you know, basically getting stabbed in the back by him and that sort of deal. And ever since then, anybody who like behaves like they want to, you know, like pretend like they're my best friend and I can trust them, and etc., all that sort of stuff, like, it throws up alarm bells. And they might not use terms like best friend or that sort of deal. It does throw up alarm bells in contexts like this, whether it's school or it's work, where there's any sort of competition or a sort of monocultural perspective. Because, you know, he was talking about some show he'd gone to see, and I remember what show he said. I'm just not going to state it here, but it was some like cultural show, and saying that, oh, there were these, you know, subtle messages in there that presented, you know, a certain perspective on, you know, certain issues or so that like he thought were controversial, and he was kind of turned off to. He liked the show overall, but oh, those specific things, and I kind of, you know, this is where I was sort of almost like probing or prodding, you know, to see, like, you know, if he was, you know, self-aware enough, you know, of like, okay, like, use of the word controversial in that context, like, kind of, you know, like the why behind it, or the nature of it, like where that was coming from. And I kind of was like, you know, well, according to who are these things controversial, you know, like that sort of deal. And then that's when I kind of picked up on the vibe, or the kind of like my gut kind of told me, like, okay, you know, this guy's obviously very leaning in one direction and not aware of sort of a broader perspective on things, and, you know, that a lot of this stuff is relative, and it's not necessarily the, you know, the case that this, that, and the other is genuinely controversial or what have you. And you know, that's kind of like when I started it's almost like, I started getting that sort of sense. I don't want to say like a sinking feeling or so, but just like uneasiness. Like, okay, I gotta find ways to sort of back out of this conversation, because then it started like, it was kind of like I tried to make it a bit of humorous conversation, but then we kind of sort of circled back to the same stuff, and it was like getting, there was like one other guy involved in the conversation, but then we started talking about, all of us kind of started talking about, for instance, yoga, and getting into like how it's presented in the country that we live in, the culture that we live in, versus like how it's originally practiced, in this country of origin. And like, I kind of made the point that, in many ways, the version you see where we are at, it's very much watered down, and a lot of the cultural aspects and, aspects like morality and all that are removed from it, because those would, offend the sensibilities of, folks who claim to be, very much like, into these practices, because it's sort of like, using the topic of yoga, it's kind of got this aura or this mystique about it, and folks want to get in on that. And there's, there obviously are health benefits as well. There's benefits to stretching and, doing breathing exercises and that sort of deal, but like, they want all of that, and, and at the same time without the thou shalt and the thou shalt nots of the original system, and started getting my perspective on certain things, and it was kind of like, well, again, it was sort of like going back and forth, trying to pull myself away from and out of that conversation, and just sort of kind of extricate myself. And honestly, like, in the past, with, people in general have said, these are topics I wish I could talk about, because I find this stuff, fascinating in many ways. But at the same time, I understand, with the way the world is gone, maybe it was always like this, and I just wasn't aware of it, because I wasn't sort of, running up against these sort of dividing lines on perspectives and such. But I don't know. I'm trying to extricate myself from this stuff, before it gets any further than that, and trying to avoid people who want to start that kind of stuff up, because obviously I've kind of had the sort of the early warning, alarms kind of going off, saying, just don't discuss these things. Don't discuss these things with people like that. And in general, he's seemed like a decent guy, just like most of the people at the company seem like decent people, but it's just like, because of the monocultural nature of where I live, it's kind of like, I don't want to say it's like being in a cult or something like that, but it's kind of like being around a bunch of people who assume that everybody's got the same perspective on things, and they're all like, their worldview and their lives are based on certain assumptions, which, I think we all kind of have a certain set of assumptions that we operate in our lives on, whether it's, it doesn't have to be politics or religion. It can just be like in terms of, we assume gravity works a certain way, and we assume that, the sun rises in the east and sets in the west, and we expect those sorts of things. And as long as with these folks, as long as you're able to avoid those certain topics, even if you're like diametrically opposed to them on those subjects, you can kind of almost like fly under the radar, if you will, and you can make a living and live and survive. And you can even have, I guess, something approximating professional friendships or professional relationships, or, that sort of deal. But you have to sort of be on the constant lookout for those subjects coming up and just steering clear of it. And I'm trying to do that myself here. Obviously, like, I may have overstepped the bounds. I may have, it's kind of like, oh, by the time you have misgivings, it's kind of, oh, it's too late. You've already made the mistake or whatever. But it just kind of more and more informs my perspective on life. These experiences where it's like, I think I've talked in the past about some of my favorite scenes from the movie There Will Be Blood. And there's the one where he's sitting there with his turns out the guy's an imposter. Spoiler alert, but if you guys see the movie, but this guy who he thinks is his brother, and he's talking about his perspective or his feelings on people in general, and how he hates people, most people. He wants to get away from them. He wants to make enough money he can just basically live all on his own, out in the middle of nowhere sort of thing, in a huge mansion, that sort of deal. And it's kind of like that's so much of my perspective. I've been watching I've been watching bits and pieces of a lecture on there's certain subjects that I think have become increasingly relevant this day and age, at least to folks in my sort of camp, if you will, if I have a camp, if I'm not just off of my own. But I guess the word I'm thinking of when I think about these lectures is the concept of demoralization, and how I want to get away from these subjects and these sorts of individuals and situations because I feel strung out from them, because I've dealt with these subjects, these kinds of people, and the experiences that have informed my perspective on things that people have denied that they ever happened. And that really sucks when you try to sort of explain things people want to ask, and you attempt to explain things people tell you that never happened. Your experience is bull hockey, it's your perspective is completely invalid just because they can't conceptualize that you may have had experiences that would give you that kind of an angle on things, and that perhaps there's some truth or validity to your perspective, and constantly being told that, being surrounded by people who it's kind of like they won't be actively against me, but I know that in a heartbeat they would betray me or turn on me because of their ideology, because of their, it's almost like a secular religion for them, or a cult, or just a worldview, that they would just turn on me because they believe X, and X, all it has to be true because they believe in it. It's kind of like their blind faith, regardless of the facts, regardless of what has actually genuinely happened. I can't place my trust in folks because that's how they will just react, And it's also kind of like why, when it comes to those folks I dealt with in college, why I get so agitated as I do, thinking about the possibility of them trying to join the company that I'm at. I had that experience with that one girl who tried to join the company, and thankfully she didn't, but that was a really tough time for me, because it was kind of like, if she gets in, I know how these folks are. They're sociopaths, narcissistic sociopaths, and this is how she'll go about things. This will be the end result, Or that guy, I referred to, who stabbed me in the back. It's like he found out where I'd previously worked and started following that company and trying to find out things about them, and it's just like never being able to get away from these folks. And so much of my obsession with getting out of debt, getting my finances right, is just that I want to have the ability to cut ties with society in general and just go off on my own and be independent and free of them. Not because I want to cause trouble, but because I just want to be safe and secure and be able to just go about my life without the chance being there of one of those folks showing up. I mean, obviously, like, you know, you live in the real world, there's always that chance. Even if you lived, you know, at the peak of a mountain, you know, there's always some chance that one of those people could be hiking that mountain. They could, you know, get all the way up there and be at the front door to your hut. You know, like, that's always there. But, you know, in the sense that it would have to be like, you know, what are the chances, that sort of thing, you know. And, you know, I'm so much in this mode of just like, I just want to keep my head down, fly under the radar, do my work, get the money I need to get, so that I can, you know, do the things I want to do with my life. Whether that's, you know, buying land, building a house for myself, whether it's, you know, going on to further school and getting that master's degree, getting certain certifications, actually getting into a genuine engineering, you know, role. If medical school ever became a possibility, or, you know, if it was just like something like wanting to exercise and to get into great shape, you know, getting on a really like healthy lifestyle, all that kind of stuff. Like I'm increasingly, if I haven't been for the last few years, I actually have to say, like, for the last few years, it's not ever increasingly, or that I'm coming to this realization or so, but I become incredibly solipsistic, which I used to think was such a bad thing, but nowadays I really don't. And in some ways it's a symptom of what I've seen the world become, or, you know, the country I live in, the culture go in this direction, where it's very much like, you know, it's almost like the only person you really can be looking out for with any sort of level of effectiveness, or, you know, a return on your investment, is yourself. And, you know, there are no causes out there worth throwing your weight behind, you know, such that, just sort of stay, what's the word, unaffiliated with any group, any label. Like, you know, this guy, you know, get back to, like, where I think my alarm bells really started going off was actually even before this. I think honestly, like, if I were to sort of examine myself, the reason I got into this conversation today was almost, you know, sort of part of my moving towards detaching or removing myself from the conversation period. It was kind of like I was trying to cut all the ties, so to speak, because the time before this, he had asked me, like, how, and I'll, you know, I'll throw the word out there, how Republican are you? And, you know, it was kind of like said it was said in a tone that made it even, I mean, it was already clear to me, like, you know, these sort of the connotations behind the word Republican to him. But it became like, or was even more clear to me with the tone of voice, you know, when I was asked that. I think we were talking about, like, the pandemic, and, you know, what our thoughts were around sort of the origins and that sort of deal. And there was another guy involved who, you know, he doesn't have that sort of, like, well, he does to a certain extent, and anyways, like, a sort of a default, you know, in a default perspectival sense, have his, you know, angle on politics, but he wasn't taking that angle in this conversation as to, like, you know, like asking a question like that. And even he kind of got involved. It was kind of like, you know, when you're asking this guy, like, a question like that, you're already kind of judging, you're kind of implying things. And I was like, you know, like, I don't even think that the premise of that question is relevant. And I started, like, sort of asking, like, where really is the divide, you know? I was kind of being obscurantist in a sense to sort of extricate myself, but also I think I was making a point with regards to, like, self-awareness, you know, on these topics, because I think, you know, furthermore, so much of why I have a problem with discussing this is not just consequences or potential consequences, but the fact that I think the premise that people go on when they discuss these things, and it doesn't necessarily matter like which camp they assign themselves to. The premise is flawed, and I think I've seen, and honestly, I've seen this occur in my own family, ironically enough, where like now I can sit down with my folks and in so many ways, we agree on issues that we used to butt heads on, whether it comes to foreign policy or cultural issues or whatever. And it's like it's kind of like, me processing that nowadays. It's kind of like almost like mind blowing in a sense, because it's stuff that like for instance with my mom and I disagreeing on things, they would just be sort of planting your feet on the ground and just bracing for the inevitable disagreement, and never wanting, like tug of war, never wanting to give up the position that either she had or I had. And now, because of what's happened over the last, let's say, 15 to 20 years, it's kind of like so many certainties or certitudes have been thrown out the window, and words that used to at least seem to have some sort of set meaning, I just don't see them as meaning much anymore. At least in the sense of what they used to mean. Like in relation to that, they don't really mean much. And so it's kind of like the dividing lines, what does this word mean, what does that word mean, and where the real conflict is at, where the real friction is at. That remains to be seen, I think. And I think a lot of people haven't even considered the fact that like there's sort of the paradigm that they're operating in, or the perspective they're taking on things is like outdated. It doesn't really apply. It doesn't really make a whole lot of sense when it comes to their analysis of these sorts of things. And again, this is I think what I've found, like another thing I dislike about the way things have become is that it's not just like people's emotional reactions, their ego investments, the potential consequences, the need to fly under the radar, all of that. It's really the fact that in the past you would end up having these kinds of conversations at a bookstore or a coffee house. Hopefully I'm using I think a coffee house is the proper term. I don't want to confuse it with something else, anyways, but it'd occur at places like that, or you'd be hanging out at your friend's house, group of friends there, and you'd be up late at night on a Friday night or a Saturday night, and maybe you played a bunch of video games, you'd watch some movies or so, or it was a party. Maybe people were drinking, or they were, smoking or whatever, and they're just, sitting there chilling, and these kind of things would come up, and it was like, it wasn't even necessarily had to be politics or some cultural issue of morality. It was like, it would be like the meaning of life, or, the afterlife, what happens after you die, or UFOs, or cryptids, or any of a slew of different issues, and it's like it would happen in those contexts where, unless you were talking with, one of those folks, he used to be one of those folks, he used to use that kind of language where it's like, oh, don't talk to so-and-so, he, she, they are, very strident about this, that, or the other issue, like, if you get into talking about, it's kind of your crazy uncle, or your, crazy neighbor, other than that one issue, they were an alright person, and you could get along with them. But, you kind of knew to avoid those topics, because it was just like that, oh, you're going to set them off, that sort of thing, they'll be, chomping at the bit, so to speak, or whatever expression you want to use, that sort of deal. And things would happen in that kind of context. But nowadays, it's like if I were to talk about the idea of a social life for myself, where these topics would come up, I mean, it's like we're sitting there at work. And it's just not a good combination because, again, there's always emotional investments in these things. And yet the discussion's occurring in a context where you're expected to sort of toe a certain line because it's a corporate and professional environment. And, you can't end up, it's kind of, you can't tell raunchy jokes or edgy jokes or discuss certain issues or go, tell people how you really feel about things because, it's a corporate professional environment. I mean, unless, of course, I may make another video about this at some other time, but unless, looking at things through a red pill lens, bringing in, say the gender dynamics issue, unless you're in the right group, you can get away with saying certain things, if you're or to expand it out of gender dynamics into politics or religion or so, unless you're in the right group or have the, almost like corporate sanctioned perspective on things, then you can express your opinion, kind of like for so much of probably the last 20 years, if you had certain perspectives on foreign policy, like you would just not be a part of the conversation, or you would get shouted out, or you would end up being punished somehow. It was kind of like you'd only be allowed in the conversation under the assumption that you agree to certain assumptions as being true, but by and large, man, maybe I'm just getting old, maybe it's because I'm 35, but it does seem like the days of live and let live are gone, and really all you can do is just shorten the amount of time that you have to fly under the radar in order to get out of life where you need to get out of it, or get out of your job where you need to get out of it, in order to extricate yourself from an increasingly polarized, balkanized, socioeconomic or sociocultural or whatever term you want to use, milieu or landscape, yeah. But I'm coming up on, it looks like, well, it says 38 minutes, basically 40 minutes long, and I don't know how long some of this long would take to upload, but I think that's kind of like what I wanted to talk about. Obviously, talking about it hasn't 100% gotten rid of the unease, but I'm hoping I go in tomorrow and things are kind of mellowed out, because honestly, as much as I may sort of take a certain perspective on things, I want to joke about stuff and kind of give off this veneer of being sort of, I think you could say ridiculous, and use that as sort of a shield to sort of deflect away from things and not basically reveal my real perspective on these different issues. Honestly, where I'm sitting at right now, I just want to get to my next paycheck, because that would mean that my car will be paid off and I can take care of some other bills, and furthermore, turn the corner to zeroing out my credit cards. And once that's done, it's kind of I'll be sitting there with just 2 student loan accounts to pay off, and owing less than I think owing less than I make, which would give me a debt to income ratio that'd be in my favor. And it's sort of like, be this huge milestone for me, and that's where my focus is at, because it's kind of like, I think I've kind of accepted a lot of things about life and the world. Not giving up on the possibility of, let's say, getting married, having kids, all that sort of deal, but like, I sort of accept the fact that, if I'm going to do that, it's not going to be where I'm living right now. And it's almost like assuming that the people with these views and such don't follow me to where I would want to be living if I was married and had kids. I'm just going to have to do my due diligence, do my damnedest to get the finances right to be able to relocate to a much more congenial environment, where there's sort of like almost like the right mix of social pressures and economic factors and the right cultural milieu, basically, that would allow me to reasonably live the kind of life I want to live. And this is not the place. Sort of the irony that, and I may get into this in more detail later, but it kind of seems like the irony of a lot of the way the world is right now is kind of like the place where you may find the jobs and make, then the money that will allow you to like live a life you want to live. That oftentimes is not going to be where you're going to, find your special someone, where you're going to start a family, build a family, raise kids, that sort of thing. It's like it's increasingly become so like divided down the middle, where it's like, okay, I'm going to have to, like, for instance, I'm going to have to accept that I may have to make a 2-hour commute to work, and it's going to suck every day that I have to do that, but in order to live where I can have kids and raise them and all that, but also be able to make the money I need to make, well, here's what you're going to have to do, sort of thing, and this crosses over into politics, culture, religion, intergender dynamics. Is a whole sort of slew of things where, again, the dividing line between the different factions in this world that we now live in, it's not so clear cut, and it's far more fragmented. But I think I hope there would be certain places out there where, it's not going to be perfect, but it would at least be feasible. And I've just got to avoid getting sidetracked. I wish I could have, should have, would have done that when I was in college, because, I got sidetracked by that girl, and I got sidetracked by those other people. Luckily, it wasn't enough that I couldn't graduate and couldn't get a decent paying job, but it was enough that, like, if I wanted to move up in my career or, fast track myself to where I really want to be at, it's like, it's added a certain level or a certain amount of work to it that it would not have been the case if, like, for instance, if my GPA had been 0.6 of a point higher. Maybe not even that. I mean, maybe like 0.4 of a point higher. In particular with, let's say grades of B or higher in certain classes, But it's something that I have to face now, and it's, a lesson learned that, I don't want to get sidetracked by these sorts of things when, like, in truth, I really don't give a flying F if this guy or that girl or this person, that person, what have you, if they believe certain things about certain issues. I really don't. I guess the problem is, like, in their minds, in a lot of cases, like, they could be puritanical and want me to be obliterated because I hold views that don't jive with their worldview, and they can't live with someone, or work with someone who, is of this affiliation or this perspective on whatever, But I don't genuinely care in this sort of person-to-person sort of a sense. And as such, like, I've got to keep my eye on the prize. And if it means I got to go be sitting off on my own, eyes on my phone or nose in a book, and be making it clear that I'm busy and I'm not to be bothered and all that kind of stuff, then that's what I'll have to do. Because as time goes on and I become more and more informed about a lot of issues, it's really become, or is becoming, the kind of world where, like, you can't afford to be getting sidetracked. You can't afford to be letting your finances or your health, mental health, physical health, etc., go, into the dumpster. You can't afford to be getting pulled into, fighting between different factions or infighting within a certain faction, because they will treat you as cannon fodder. They will treat you as some foot soldier, and if your life gets destroyed, they don't care. They may use you as a martyr of some sort, or as a poster boy for the, representing the other faction they don't like. But in the grand scheme of things, like, your life doesn't really matter to them. And I don't care what words they want to use to try and convince me that it doesn't to them. And it's almost like you have to bet on your sacrifice somehow making a difference in the wider world, when, in all likelihood, you're just one person and you're not going to make much of a difference, and it's not going to bring some sort of ROI that would justify getting pulled into that kind of stuff. So honestly, like, I hope I can follow my own advice, and I hope it's not too late for me to, like, extricate myself, because I think I've kind of given off the perspective that it's not that I'm any one faction or so, but I'm definitely contrarian. I definitely question things, and when you're dealing with groups of people who are in a sort of monocultural mindset, or they live in a bubble, just questioning the official line, so to speak, is dangerous. They might not literally kill you, but if they can get you fired, if they can get you written up, if they can get you on the short list, if they can get you to be denied that promotion you've been working on for so long, or close off any doors that might open up, or have opened up for you because of your hard work to advance yourself, or to get to network with the right group of people, or you could use college as an example, to do well in your classes, or to get that internship, or there's a whole slew of examples that one can kind of like philosophically consider. But basically, it's just something that I would love to avoid as best I can. And I don't know if I've sort of undone that opportunity for myself, but I think because I'm relatively aware. I don't think I'd be having this kind of a conversation, making this kind of video, if I wasn't. But just got to avoid that, because honestly, like, it ain't worth it. It isn't worth it. And there's just folks who want to pretend that they're just interested for, interest's sake, or, they wanted to have some conversation because they're bored or whatever. Like, nah, not at work. If we were all hanging out at somebody's house and that was that, that'd be one thing, but we're not. This is work, So anyways, it's been a long video. I'm not having too many problems with Nofap per se. Having some weird dreams, having some, nocturnal emissions here and there, but it's just kind of becoming routine, which I think is good. I want it to be routine. I want it to be just my normal sort of thing, especially since it will negatively impact upon my spiritual practices in the future, meditation and things of that nature. So anyways, that's it for me. Hopefully this doesn't turn into some sort of fiasco, but I guess only time will tell. So anyways, I'll see you folks around. Thanks for watching, even though, for the most part it's been a dark screen, just my voice. But anyways, take it easy, take care, and I'll see you folks around. Bye-bye.